Doctor? Doctor? Doctor?
Oh, coming, dear. Yes, good evening. Good evening. My name is Dr. Minot Lewis, and this is my wife, Mrs. Mildred Lewis. We have been asked to share our first encounter with the great guru, Swami Yogananda. One moment, dear. My story begins one fine October day in 1920, as I was leaving my dentist office in Davis Square, Somerville, Massachusetts. Walking diagonally across the square, a strange figure passed.
A fast-moving figure.
He was clothed in
an orange coat. Oh, sorry, dear. Do go on.
Yes, you are quite right, my dear. He was clothed in an orange coat.
Orange puttees.
Orange-colored high-lace shoes.
With an orange turban on his head.
Of course, in my surprise at seeing such a figure on the streets of Somerville, Massachusetts, I turned and watched him as he passed and disappeared across the square. Little did I realize that it was none other than the great master, Swami, known at that time as Swami Yogananda, and later known as Paramhansa Yogananda.
May I?
Oh, one moment, dear. Although I did not meet the master until Christmas Eve of that same year, Mrs. Lewis actually met him first, actually shook his hand.
Yes, I did. I attended in the fall a lecture at the Rosicrucian Society where Mrs. Clemens told me she wanted me to be introduced to someone afterwards. She appeared with a dark-skinned Indian Swami whose long black hair flowed over his shoulders. He was wearing an orange coat, orange puttees, orange-colored high-lace shoes with a large orange turban on his head. Well, I was not accustomed to seeing anyone dressed in this fashion, yet I must have been a strange-looking figure to this Hindu Swami, as he was to me. Mrs. Clemens then introduced me to this Oriental, a Swami Yogananda Giri of Calcutta, India. As I look back, I no doubt must have been so awestruck as to be speechless. I had very little to say, but I have always remembered this meeting. As we said before, Doctor met the master on Christmas Eve.
Yes. Have a seat, dear. Yes, I made an appointment to meet the master at Unity House, Park Square, Boston. I had not been enthusiastic about meeting him. Well, for the simple reason that I was somewhat prejudiced. I had heard many stories about the fakirs of India and their strange customs and doings, and I was not about to be fooled or taken in, so to speak, by such people. Nobody is going to hoodwink me. But, as I have said, I condescended to meet the master this time. And following him. As I entered the room, he looked at me and gave me a little smile. We exchanged a few greetings, and we sat down to discuss various matters along religious lines. I said to him, "Sir, I have searched in many places in scriptures, and I have asked many people the meaning of such passages as, 'If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light.' I have not been able to receive a satisfactory answer to my question. nor has anyone been able to show me such a light. And he said to me, quoting Jesus' words, "Can the blind lead the blind? They both fall into the ditch." Well, these words impressed me because they were from our Bible, and it seemed a reasonable answer to my question. Well, being an outspoken American, I said right out, "Have you seen the single eye? Do you know such things? Have you seen such things?" And he answered, "Yes, I think so." "Do you think I could see such things?" "Yes, I think so." "Show me." Well, with that, he smiled and procured a tiger skin and put it on the floor and said, "Doctor, would you mind sitting opposite me?" Well, he was sitting cross-legged, and I had never, to my knowledge, sat cross-legged under such circumstances. And I said, "Yes, certainly." Well, somehow I managed to get down into a cross-legged position. I assure you, it was not the lotus posture. And as I sat across from him, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Doctor, will you always love me as I love you?" I had never been talked to under such circumstances before. But as I looked at him, I saw something I had never seen in anyone before, and I quickly said, "Yes, I will." And I distinctly remember he rubbed his hands together and said, "That's fine. I take charge of your life." Well, what he meant at that time, I had no idea, but it felt all right, so I acquiesced and we proceeded. Now, as I was sitting across from him, I distinctly remember that he pressed his forehead against my forehead. He told me to look at the point between my eyebrows, which I did. He did not suggest anything that I see or try to influence me in any way by suggestion. What I saw came in a natural way. I was fully conscious, fully alert, fully awake, and I saw the spiritual eye. Because the Master stilled the waves of my mind and allowed my own intuition of the soul to see the doorway to the infinite. That vision has never left me. The Master once again expressed its hand against mine, and it is then that I saw the great light of the 1,000-rayed lotus, with its many, many rays, its silver leaves, the most exquisite thing that can be seen. Well, after seeing all the wonderful things that I did, I was most grateful to this great man of realization. Then he said to me, "Doctor, promise me that you will not avoid me." Well, I was only too glad to promise that. But little did I realize how hard it would be to keep that promise in the difficult middle ground of discipline. But I kept my promise, and I was thus saved from much suffering and much delusion.
Wonderful, dear. Wonderful. Well, I need to point out again that meeting the Master happened on Christmas Eve. And it was our custom to decorate the Christmas tree on Christmas Eve. I knew that Doctor had an appointment with the Swami, and said he would be back in time to decorate the tree. I remember his instructions to have everything ready. But hour after hour passed, and soon it was midnight. This was most upsetting, for how were we going to get the tree ready for Santa Claus before the children came running downstairs? Now, I was going to do something about this Christmas tree business. So I prepared myself. There was a rocking chair in the kitchen, and I planted myself in it. Sweater sleeves rolled up, with a rolling pin clutched firmly in my right hand. There I sat. As the clock neared 1 o'clock, I first heard the automobile come into the driveway. Then I heard the garage door close. The door opened, and soon footsteps came from the back hall into the kitchen. I was truly ready to swing that rolling pin. But Doctor came into the room with the most divine smile on his face, as pleasant as could be in the flow of being with Master. And so I could not touch him. I dropped the rolling pin. Mind you, there were words all right, but that was all. And just for the record, the Christmas tree got trimmed and put up in plenty of time, and Santa did come before the children awoke.
Yes, there's a story that Master used to tell from the lecture platform, and the moral of the story is, when you are in God's light, nothing, not even a wrathful wife with a rolling pin.
Well, you know, I was still very upset with the Master over the Christmas tree incident. And it was soon after New Year's, and Doctor and I arrived at Mrs. Hasey's house on a cold winter's night and took off our wraps. I got led into the the parlor, and sitting in front of me was Swami Yogananda. This was most upsetting. Dr. and Mrs. Hasey had arranged this meeting without my knowledge. After the rolling pin incident, I had said I was not getting messed up with any religion. And no Hindu. But Master called me into a private meeting, which lasted only a few moments. When I came out, I was in tears. I don't recall what happened, but I knew later that his spiritual power had completely transformed my consciousness. A wonderful relationship had been established, and I became a disciple. My loyalty and devotion has been unwavering ever since. Doctor always said the year he met Master was his first real Christmas. And so we spent every Christmas with Master in celebration of that first meeting. Well, hey, let's tell him that story about the joke we played on Master. You know, the one where we tied a string to his ankle and then to the doorknob, so when he awoke...
Perhaps some other time, dear.
Or what about the time that you were in your boat in that storm and almost drowned, but you remembered to center your consciousness in the Om?
Oh, yes, dear. That's a good one, but perhaps some other time. Huh? Yes.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Buchanan. However, Swami Yogananda has given me the name Kamala, and this is what I go by. It means lotus. There are crossroads in life which can completely change the direction of one's travels. For me, this was the hour of first seeing my guru. His precepts were to highlight my journey upon a way that led my heart and my thoughts Godward. The evening was January 13th, 1925, a very eventful date. The Philharmonic Auditorium was full to its 3,000 capacity, and everyone had come to hear a certain emissary from India, from that land where sages have been nurtured through the ages. We were blessed to know one of her most illumined. Well, Swami Yogananda came up on the platform, his orange robes identifying him with an ancient order of renunciates. My spontaneous first impression was youthfully recorded in my diary. I wrote that his smile was like the sunshine of a soul. His smile was so joyous, and it conveyed a warmth that seemed to envelop everyone. How did I happen to be present? My mother, Dr. Frances Grant Buchanan, she had seen billboards with his picture. Her interest was based on a respect for the teachings of India, and well, she was seeking truth. Was I also seeking truth? I was only 19. But when I saw him, I thought, now I have found one who can answer any question that I might ever want to ask. His public lectures always included a fund of enthralling and unforgettable stories, each one of them conveying a certain spiritual concept. Once he shared with us that in his youth he had been extremely thin, and that his present weight had come as a blessing of healing from his own guru. He was aware that here in the Western world, saintliness is usually associated with thinness, even to the point of emaciation. And so it was with his keen sense of humor that he explained to everyone that in India, it's desirable to be pleasantly plump because a thin teacher is a walking advertisement for their scarcity of students. On another occasion, he invited everyone after the lecture to come up to the stage and to touch his arms, which he caused to vibrate with energy. It was in the manner of an electrical machine. In the middle of another lecture that I attended, he asked if there were any physicians in the audience. And then he invited two of them to join him up on the platform. He had one positioned on either side of him, and he allowed them to take his pulse, one from each wrist. He wanted to demonstrate how he could control his own heartbeat. And so, as the physicians simultaneously counted his pulse, they found it running differently on each side of his body. And then, in the middle of this, he stopped his heartbeat altogether. And then he stopped breathing. You should have seen the shocked look on these doctors' faces. It was unforgettable. It was about 9 months, I suppose, after I first began attending his lectures, that I had my first conversation with the Master. I had gone backstage, and I saw him standing off by the wings. I observed his gentle dignity and the reserve that was always so natural with him. This teacher was revered in my heart and mind in a way that I couldn't explain. Later, I learned that this is the feeling of the disciple for the Guru. Well, on that occasion, I approached him, and he greeted me. And during our conversation, he offered me counsel. He said to me, "Always keep your dignity and remember your power of thought and will." As I prepared to leave, I asked for his blessing, and he placed his hand on my head, and he silently prayed. At first, I felt a deep stillness come over me, and then it was as though a sacred joy began to fill my being as my spirit was lifted in the most immense peacefulness. It wasn't long before my mother and I had struck a divine friendship with Swami. In fact, it was midsummer when there was a knock at our door, and Swami, smiling, was there with us. We felt so blessed to have him with us in our little cottage in Manhattan Beach, California. Mother and I were aware of his great spiritual stature, and yet his simplicity of manner allowed our very special respect for him to blend naturally with the friendship that he offered us. Those days were sunny and warm. He loved to swim at the beach. And once he went with our chauffeur to Pismo Beach, and he stayed there for 3 days. When he came back, the chauffeur took my mother aside, and he said to her in a very perplexed tone, "Ma'am, I don't really know what he was doing, but, well, he just went out to the sand dunes and he sat there, facing the ocean. And he stayed there all day long, every single day." One facet of Master's true saintliness lay in his ability and his willingness to meet the constant demands of public life and to cope with every duty, and yet to stay permanently in the sanctuary of inner beatitude. But here, now with us, he could roam in the cosmic vastness without even a part of his mind having to turn towards the multitudinous affairs of his daily life. As Jesus went to the mountaintop to pray, my Guru had gone by the ocean to commune with his heavenly Father. Also, during his time with us in our home, we often went on scenic drives, which were very beautiful and the setting for great spiritual inspiration. On one of these chauffeur drives, I was seated in the back seat of the car next to Master when he entered a state of samadhi. Outwardly, he became very still, inwardly absorbed in God. His consciousness was completely interiorized. I was aware of this. And when we returned to the house, my mother and the chauffeur, they just got up and they went indoors. I hesitated. I didn't know what to do. I thought, well, maybe maybe he would like to be alone, or perhaps he wants someone to remain with him. I sat with this for a little while, and still feeling unsure, I decided that I would stay, but only for a little while. So I sat next to him very quietly, and then I got up, and I also went inside. I wish that I had understood what a blessing it is for a disciple to remain in the Guru's presence and to receive the blessings of being so near. Also, during his time in our home, he kept a small autograph book with thoughts and prayers that he had inscribed. He later gave this to me as a gift. I'd like to share with you one of his inscriptions. The Master wrote, "Wherever in this house I have prayed, I leave an everlasting altar of devotion built in the invisible ether, wherein ye shall find him always. In these selfsame places quickly delve deep within yourself with reverence and with steady concentration, and ye shall find that secret altar." Master traveled quite extensively on lecture tours all across the country and to other countries as well. Once when he returned from an extended tour, he brought back mangoes for all of us. This was his favorite fruit. He also brought with him recordings of the music of India and of the very well-known opera singer, Amelita Galli-Curci. She was also a disciple of his. He loved listening to this music, and we, of course, cherished the opportunity to share in his joy. One evening, after a lively conversation about Shakespeare, he delighted everyone with a dramatic portrayal of Anthony's famous oration from Julius Caesar. It was a flawless reading, done by candlelight. But even still, it wasn't long before all of Anthony's famous strains and all other earthly drama were forgotten as we all turned our hearts and our minds to meditation. While he was away on another lecture tour, he'd been gone for about 11 months, I believe, I had to be hospitalized. It was after a recent surgery, and I spent the subsequent 7 months in a full body cast. I will never forget the day that my mother walked into the hospital room with an expression of delight on her face. And I knew that my guru had returned. I could feel the radiance that his ever-present bliss state imparted. On that occasion, he brought me English toffees, and he also brought me a curry dinner that he had personally prepared for me. I've known God's healing to reach many people through the channel of my enlightened guru. Although I was in a tremendous amount of pain during that time, I never sought nor asked for any kind of physical healing. This is because I have asked God to bring all of my karmic debts into this lifetime so that I can pay them and be free. I may have invited much, considering our many past lives. On another visit with me in the hospital, Master was seated next to my hospital bed. And at one point in the evening, he turned and he looked at me and he said, "I see marriage for you." Years later, the conditions that he described upon meeting my future husband, Edward, happened exactly as he had foretold. Later, when I became the first woman ordained as a minister for Self-Realization Fellowship, Edward and I had the great privilege of running a center for Master in Oakland, California. Throughout my life as a disciple, I have been blessed with many sacred experiences. One morning at Mount Washington, a group of disciples and I had gone out to the front entrance to bid goodbye to a departing guest. As we were returning to the entrance, we saw Master sitting at his balcony in the morning sunlight. He greeted some of the disciples and they responded to him, speaking quietly. But I stood back from the group, looking carefully at him to be sure of what I saw. Unlike any experience that I had previously known, I saw that Master was blue-colored. Not an aura, but the very texture of his skin was that mystic Christmas blue, the vibratory color of Christ consciousness. In that moment, I understood that Master was complete. He was one with Krishna and with Christ. And it was by his grace that I was blessed with such an experience. In his early life, he tells us that he was blessed with a preview of 2 pathways and given the opportunity to choose which of them he would follow. One of them was for a meditative life along the river Ganges in India without any kind of physical pain or suffering. Or he could come to America to offer spiritual guidance to countless thousands, and yet he would experience great physical suffering towards the end of his life. We are so blessed that his decision was for our benefit and for the many in the future who, through his teachings, will find their way also to God.
Alberto Defoe, on November the 8th, 1903, in a French settlement in Iron Mountain, Michigan, where we only spoke French. I was the youngest of 5 brothers and 5 sisters, and I don't remember anything about my childhood, except what I was told, and that was that I was a great deal of trouble to my mother, because I was always sick. My aunt once said that she was carrying me to be baptized at our church. And she was feeling so sorry for her sister, my mother. And there was ice all around. It was winter. A thought crossed her mind. What if I should accidentally slip and put this one out? Wouldn't it be so much easier for my sister? Well, she said she was just kidding. And then later she was glad it did not happen because, well, I was a great deal of help to my mother. I cooked and cleaned by her side. In fact, I could not bear to have her out of my sight for fear something would happen to her. And every morning I'd walk with her to go to Mass in the dark, because I could not bear to have her walk alone. Years later I asked Master, why was I born into a Catholic family? And he said, it is because of your devotion. When my mother died, I prayed that I too would die. So I became very ill. But my life was spared because Master intervened. You see, it was a dream vision, and I was laying on my bed, and right next to me, well, I thought he was a woman because he had long hair and a robe. But he lifted me up sideways, so our hearts were even. I could feel this electric wave go through his heart into mine, through my body and out my toes. And he gently laid me back on the bed, and I looked at him shocked. I said, "Am I dead?" And he said, "No, you are not dead." He looked at me strangely. He said, "But what is the matter with your eyes?" He took his 2 fingers, he poked them right through my eyes. Well, I did not know anything was physically wrong with my eyes. But to this day, 2 things have happened. I do not have to wear glasses, and he opened my spiritual eye. I physically saw Master for the first time on December 19th, 1927, in Detroit, Michigan. It was a lecture hall. I sat spellbound, looking at the most beautiful man I had ever seen, with his orange robe and his long hair flowing over his shoulders. And he was playing his harmonium. "Oh God, beautiful, oh God, beautiful." Do you know he gave me that very harmonium years later? Well, I had never heard chanting before. It fascinated me to the core. I always thought of Jesus as God without ever the hope of finding him. But this chant, it spoke of a God that was tangible. And so I took all the lessons from Brahmachari Narod. It was the Yogota lessons, the exercises, meditation techniques. I learned them all. In 1928, Master came again, and in 1929. In the meantime, I had gotten married to Mr. Darling. But the doctor said I still had health issues and should go to a warmer climate. So I picked Los Angeles. And in 1929, Master shook hands with everybody in the audience. He came to me, I shook his hand, I said, "I am coming to Los Angeles soon." And he said, "Oh, when you go, you must come to Mount Washington and visit us." I was so happy he invited me. So, November the 8th, 1929, I'm on a bus as a birthday gift from my husband, Mr. Darling. Mr. Darling later lovingly gave me up for a life of service to God and Guru. So I took that bus to Los Angeles. I stayed at the YWCA. And every day I'd walk that long, winding hill up to Mount Washington. But the minute I'd put my foot on that hill, I could feel the Om, as if it were coming like a wave from Master, just beckoning me. It was about the second day I arrived. Mount Washington, I walked into the lobby, I saw no one. I went into the kitchen. But there was Master, he's standing next to the stove, and he says, well, where have you been?" I said, YWCA? I advanced to shake his hand. Again, that same electric wave went through my body. He said later that at that exact moment, he remembered me as one of the many he had seen in a vision before coming to the United States in 1920. So Master asked me to stay for dinner. And I decided to help, of course. I washed pots and pans and whatnot. And all of a sudden I felt very ill. So I left the kitchen I met Brahmachari in the road, in the hallway. He had moved there since. I said, I'm not feeling well. I must go. I cannot be of use to anyone. And he said, well, why don't you just stay in the girls' room for a while and lay down until you feel better before dinner? I said, no. I cannot be a burden to anyone. So I left. Master said he was so disappointed I had left. He thought, what is this, Lord? Is she turning away so soon after returning home? He said, when I found out from Brahmacharya Road that you were ill, I actually felt better. Because I had made this dinner in honor of your homecoming after incarnations of absence. Had I known that, I would have stayed whether it cost me my life. This is one time that ignorance was not bliss. Oh, there was about a month later. I moved into Mount Washington. And we had meditation every Thursday. And after meditation, there was a fire crackling in the fireplace. And the master was telling stories. And then he said goodnight to everyone. He asked everyone to leave but me. And he told me to sit quietly next to him. And he turned suddenly to me and he said, Ma Durga. This unexplainable thrill went through my body. He said, Ma Durga was a name I'd given you in another lifetime when we were in ashram in India. He said, you were nun then too? You cooked for me? So, you see, to Master, this incarnation was just a continuation of that previous incarnation. Oh, there was one time Master introduced me and a woman named Carla as musicians. Well, I pulled him aside as soon as I could. I said, Master, why did you introduce me as a musician? You know I do not know one note from another. He said, well, Carla, she's a child protege, but she cannot play my chants because there are no notes. If there were notes, she would play them perfectly, but it would not come from her heart. That is why I want you to play. Always from your heart, your mind, and what naturally comes to you from me. So, I always played the harmonium. I sang every Sankirtan meditation. I played the big drum. When a person earnestly and deeply, sincerely calls for God, he comes in the form of a blessed guru. And I was washing vegetables at a sink. And I was thinking of the chant door of my heart, and I came to the twin verse. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me. And I turned. There was Master standing right by my side. He said, I have come. I have come. It was June 1948, an incident I will never forget. One by one, we all found ourselves in Master's room. When I walked in, he said, Durga, sit a little distance away from me. Divine Mother does not want you to touch me. And he began to speak of his love for Divine Mother, and she in turn used his voice so we could all hear. Well, this ecstasy for 3 days and 3 nights. So we all took dictation. At one point, She called us all up by name and told us all our faults. I got a scolding I shall never forget. Divine Mother just took me over the carpet. Master was so sweet, he came to all of our defense. She said, Durga, you have been very selfish. You did not give up your room for a guest. And Master said, please do not punish our mother. Durga is very unselfish, and she is my pal, and she takes on the sins of others. Please, please do not punish her. Well, you can imagine how remorseful we all felt. We just cried for those 3 days and 3 nights until we were just listless as can be. Well, it was my turn to take dictation, so I give you a little background story. Master asked me to do many things, many difficult. I always said yes. This time, and a worker walked over to him, gave him a note. She said she did not like my actions because I was ignorant and uneducated. Master showed me the note and I said, well, I do not have a formal education. He said very defiantly, you may be uneducated, but you are not ignorant. Look at me. I do not know English beyond the parts of speech. Look what the Lord has written through me. And you will write too. So it was my turn to take dictation. There's this little crack in the closet I could barely see. I wrote for a long time. Long hand. Divine Mother said, June 6th, 1948, an ignorant but loving God secretly dictates to an intelligent, ignorant myself. Master said Divine Mother wanted me to know that it was not me who was ignorant, because it was I who was chosen to take dictation and not her. On that fateful March 7th, 1952, I was in Encinitas with Roger C. and the phone rang, telling us that Master had passed. He had entered Mahasamadhi. So we called Dr. and Mrs. Lewis, and the 4 of us drove all through the night and came to Mount Washington at 4 a.m. I broke the long silence by saying, I would give anything to see Master sitting on his bed, his little legs swinging, greeting us all one by one. But it was not meant to be. How can one speak of a sorrow so deep that not even a whisper can loosen its roots? We all showed our outward sorrow, and I sat next to Master and I patted his sweet divine face, and all of a sudden this peace came over me. Everybody felt it in the room. And it was only then that I could appreciate the blissful little look on his face and his podgy hands and feet that were still so soft and pliable. We wanted to make sure he just, before we took him to Forest Lawn, that he had not entered Mahasamadhi. The Samadhi itself. So we decided that we should whisper the mantra he had taught us to bring him back into outer consciousness. So it was my turn first. And I whispered into his ear. And I heard his voiceless voice say, "Why do you want me to come back in this old carcass?" And I said, "Because we are selfish, sir." And he said, "Leave it to Durga to tell the truth." Master said, "I am Om. Everything is Om. I will enter the body of Rajasi and into the consciousness of everyone." There are no words to describe the feeling of seeing that beloved face for the last time. My only consolation is what Master often said to me. I will go ahead to prepare a better place for you all, where we will meet again in greater glory.